the true hangs on that the true is both substance and subject.
Yeah.
But I'm just playing with that and saying systems and subject. And basically saying that instead of substance, which Hegel's deriving from Spinoza, that I use system, which is just, I think, a more modern way of thinking substance. Because even if you think of most process philosophers and interdisciplinary scientists today, they more think system than substance. And
Sure.
and we could go into why that is, but I'm just saying here, I'm basic that's like the reason why I'm making that concession is because I'm not really responding to Spinoza in the way that Hegel's obviously responding to Spinoza. I'm trying to get a conversation between system science and continental philosophy. So that's sort of like, so I'm basically saying here, like the fact that becoming is the vanishing being and nothing is the seed, which Hegel calls the seed of the philosophical sciences, which is not a philosophy of science and is not a scientific philosophy. It's a philosophical science or the science of the concept or the science of the idea to connect Plato and Hegel. Right? So it's not a philosophy of science like Thomas Kuhn or Karl Popper, and it's not a scientific philosophy like Karl Marx.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, this notion of sorry, not system, subject as substance. In fact, I was just rereading Žižek's Sublime Object, just for some writing I was doing, and I've got the quote right here. So, for instance, Žižek says that Hegel asserts a previously unheard of division that runs through the subject as well as through the substantial order, collectivity, uniting the two. That is to say, what if the reconciliation between the particular and universal occurs precisely through the division that cuts across the two? So that latter bit, the division. I mean, I don't know how to even ask this question, Cadell, but okay, what I find that's lacking in the conversations, both in like the process philosophy or even like these notions of kind of like the modern idealism you see with people like Bernardo Kastrup, is this they don't account for the
It's
antagonism.
an unreflective one. Like the
That's it. It's like a monad. Yeah,
it's 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 a way like I can't stress this enough. When you include the subject into the truth, you're asking for a lifelong negativity. And like that's much easier to have an unreflective one. Like it's I can't stress like it you're gonna your life your life thinking process is going to be constantly disrupted because you and your vicissitudes are part of the truth.
correct.
And there's some you've got to think that. So but it's also great because your thought can stay alive. Like your thought is constantly refreshed by the vicissitudes of your day-to-day life. But like, and also you have to like to think. Here's the thing: to think. Here's the challenge. I think to think the one and history is the ultimate philosophical challenge. Like people always just want to think history without the one, or they want to think the one without history, because both are way easier. Like, right? Like to think the one as history is incredibly difficult. Like it's and to put it like and now I'm obviously speaking what I just was saying there was speaking in philosophical terms. But if I was just to speak in common everyday terms, it's like the challenge of a long-term marriage.
Hmm.
Like to think like for example, like just to like to bring a concrete concept, like to think a long this and this is what motivates me. Like to think a long-term marriage is to think the one as history, right? Very concretely. Like, what else is it? You're thinking about the one as history. And well, think about a marriage. It's two elements which are opposite and which will never actually be one,
Mm.
and which will always have a gap, and which will always kind of misunderstand each other, and which will always kind of be missing each other constitutively, and which will always kind of be a bit of a surprise to each other, and is always kind of like the challenge of thinking what can't be thought. And that's what you have to, and that's the challenge, right? So I'm now I'm using that as like even like the best example I think of
Yeah, but
the
also,
stake.
yeah, but also here's where I mean, in my rereading of, because it's funny. Initially, when I got into Żygian philosophy, I thought it was deeply pessimistic. It is, but it doesn't end there. The thing is, this the antagonisms, this like misunderstanding, the or to use more Lacanian jargon, this not working, the that it doesn't fit. This is a productive not working. It's not a reconciliation, but this division, this cut it's a product. It's what keeps thinking going.
I'm I think we need to have a more concerted effort to uh resist and counteract this false idea that Žižek is pessimistic in of course Žižek will say things like I hate life in like joking way,
Yeah.
but no, I think that I think it's actually the way Žižek's thinking is the only way to be really optimistic. Like there's what I mean, or you could say an optimism of the real.
Mm,
Like it
well
because
put.
you don't want to have an optimism that like to me I would much rather be I would much rather be pessimistic than to be optimistic in a childish or a superficial or like a way that's just a wish fulfillment or like just a detached optimism like or an optimism that like the type of optimism that just blatantly ignores the actual tensions and antagonisms of the situation. Like I have no for me personally my temperament I have no time for this type of optimism. I only am interested in the like, and here's my experience of living this like because I'm not just thinking this philosophy, like I live this, I live out this way, been living this philosophy for approaching a decade. I think that what you get is and what you learn is there is a type of abyssal confrontation here. There is an abyssal dimension to this way of living, but if you're willing to think the antagonisms of the moment in their abyssal nature, retroactively, you can see that actually there was a forward advance. Like I've experienced that. I've experienced that in my relationships. I've experienced that in my business, or I've experienced that in my creative drive. That if I'm willing to think the imminent antagonism of the situation, that actually a higher level, almost like anti-fragility or meta stability, uh, is a retroactive result of the tarrying with the negative.
Mm.
Like the tarrying with the tarrying with the negative does lead. The thing is, the reason why it's difficult is because in the moment of the tarrying with the negative, it literally feels like everything is going to fall apart.
Yeah, yeah.
And it feels that way. And the thing is that because you're in the thing, like you're so like back to the beginning of systems and subjects, you're in the system. You can't like abstract like from an external third person point of view. You know, like you can't be like the disinterested, neutral, objective scientist that's not in part of the system, and just like as it were, like think about like what evolutionary scientists observe. Like I always was fascinated when I was in originally I was in primatology and I was reading these field notes. I actually went to Africa for 2 summers to study chimpanzees. But I was reading these primatological field notes of like, which always get left out of the scientific papers of like what they saw. Like they would see, like, for example, like infant, they would see an infanticide. Or like they would see infanticide, they would see rape, they would see war when watching the chimpanzees, but they would just be collecting data as external, like, and you would get like these scientific reports about like rates of infanticide in this chimpanzee group or rates of, murder in this chimpanzee group or something, like a very cold analysis. But I'm saying that evolutionary biologists and anthropologists, they're super aware of the brutality of nature, but they're always studying it from an external point of view. Like it's not like they aren't getting raped.
Yeah.
Their kid isn't being killed, right? They're studying it from an external point of view. But the challenge here, and this is like the deep challenge, I think, of Hegelian science, is what is Hegelian science? It's that the interesting thing about science is that it changes from pre-modern philosophy, where pre-modern philosophy is just contemplating substance, and modern science is testing substance. It's testing it, it's experimenting with it, but where the limits of modern science are, the difference between modern science and Hegelian science, is that you don't have to, you can't only test substance, you have to test substance and subject. It's not only substance, it's also subject. So you're in the system. You are under the test. Your subjectivity is the test. So the thing is that this dealing with the immanent antagonisms of life is the test. And your capacity to be scientific is your capacity to do the conceptual labor of the negative. Like your conceptual tarrying with the negative is the test. That's as at least as close as I can think.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I just want to add this point here. I mean, I want to be mindful of the time because I've got two really important questions, but it's really interesting. I've spoken to a lot of Hegelian thinkers, and for some reason, a lot of them either haven't worked. I don't mean like the scholars. I mean just like generally people like me who are neophytes interested in Hegel. They haven't really worked that much through Kierkegaard. And I would say this, Žižek makes this point in his interviews, but also in his writing that Kierkegaard is most Hegelian when he thinks he's against Hegel. Because Kierkegaard, if you read Kierkegaard, he always makes this point that you are in the equation, you're in the system in that sense. And this is ultimately for me even Hegel's point. I mean, initially, I remember because I read Kierkegaard before Hegel, and I always thought of Hegel as is almost like what you describe, the caricatured version of Hegel, system, big system, and then you're just like building this abstract philosophical system. But Kierkegaard's whole point was that no, you're in the system, you're caught up in it. And that's why Žižek says that Kierkegaard is most Hegelian when he thinks he is being most anti-Hegelian. So I mean I couldn't agree more. Cadell, I just had to make that point. But yeah, sorry, were you gonna comment on that?
I just wanted to say that my main contribution to Logic for the Global Brain is a paper called Concept to Being, where what I try to do, and I tried to do this in the course, like it's almost absurd what I try to do in the course, but like in the paper, what I'm trying to do is actually apply the Hegel's logic of the concept and demonstrating that it actually allows you to map the way I've built Philosophy Portal. So I'm trying to say Hegel's system is not a big system external to me as a subject. Hegel's system is system and subject, which if you actually read the science of logic deeply and you can model your own subjective process can be modeled using Hegel's logic. It's system and subject. And in the class, I was even able to model myself to the point where I could identify where in the logic my current position of subjectivity was located and the contradiction that I was in. Like that's the remarkable thing about Hegel's logic is like he like with Spinoza, you're just getting a system of substance. But in Hegel, you're getting a system of substance and subject. And that means that like your subjective process is it's following an unconscious conceptual logic. And if you actually follow that through, it's not an enslaving thing. It actually brings you to a different level of being. It's not anti-life. It's not anti-being. What it does is even more interesting. It brings you to I think, it brings you to a level of being in life that you could not have gotten otherwise. So in a way, you do release. So like, for example, like say say I never started Philosophy Portal because I'm just nihilistic, the whole thing's a mess, the whole academic system's a waste, and there's no point to teach anything or do anything. We're just living in a late capitalist,
Med-
bullshit society, right? If I never did that, if I approach that way, no point to start, because the point is that Philosophy Portal will not last forever. It's a process that will unfold under a logic that's even partially unconscious to me, of course. But if I follow the logic of it to its end, to its dissolution, Philosophy Portal is own end, where I'll find myself is a position in being and life that I wouldn't have been able to get to without the process of Philosophy Portal. So the point is that if you unfold a conceptual logic, don't identify with the beginning. This is what people can't. If this is why people can't build something. The reason why people can't build something is because they identify too much with the immediacy of the concept. Like I had an intuition of Philosophy Portal at the beginning of it, but that doesn't do anything. Like it's a nice image, but you have to follow the mediation of it with all the surprises and negativities and all the practical bullshit of doing it. And where you end up if you follow it to its logical conclusion is a point of being or life that you couldn't have gotten otherwise. And I think all people who are self-revolutionizing entities, like for example, let me throw two documentaries out there where you could watch as these examples of self-revolutionizing entities, where I think they're Hegelian subjects in the sense that they get to a place in being or life that they couldn't have gotten to if they didn't follow their own conceptual logic. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Vince McMahon. If you watch the documentaries of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Vince McMahon, they're both crazy people, absolutely mad people, and passionate as hell and driven as hell. And what they do is, so Arnold Schwarzenegger's is very easy. You could even model Arnold Schwarzenegger with Lacan's imaginary, symbolic, and real triad. So with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he had the weightlifting, and he followed weightlifting to its absolute exhaustion. And then when he got to the end of it, he had done everything possible in weightlifting. He transitioned to acting, but he couldn't have gotten to acting without weightlifting. He couldn't have done. And then he followed acting to its limit. And then he did everything possible in acting. And then he went into politics. And he couldn't have gone into politics without the acting that he. So I'm saying that, and he couldn't have predicted in advance. Like when he was a weightlifter, he couldn't have predicted that he would become in movies. And then when he was in movies, he couldn't have predicted that he would go into politics. So the point is that you get to, like, if you follow this logic, the point is that you exhaust a certain concept.
Yes.
And when you exhaust a certain concept, like everyone, it's so easy to identify with the immediacy of a concept. Like have the immediacy of the concept as me as like a big weightlifter. Or have the immediacy of the concept of me as a movie star or a politician. But to actually do it and to exhaust it, well, that takes drive. That takes crazy drive.
Yeah, I mean, in philosophy, one name I can think of is Wittgenstein, who does this. Wittgenstein for sure. But also, well, from everything you said, Cadell, what I really want to stress on, and this has been for me, this has been one huge takeaway from Hegelian philosophy, is the fact that you can't predict it, that it's purely contingent. The drive is there, it's an absolute drive, but but the event itself in some sense is contingent, and then necessity is always made from contingency. I mean, Adrian Johnson writes of this well in his book, The New German Idealism. So I mean, gosh, man, that was so good. I don't even know where to go from there.